Hey, this is John Ortberg, and I am coming to you with a special 4th of July weekend bonus edition, just to kind of stay in touch. If you have particularly keen eyes, you might notice that the bookshelves behind me are even more crowded than usual. Nancy and I always argue about bookshelves. She thinks they should have space and knickknacks and vases, but they should not. They are bookshelves, and they should be packed with books. And right now, the bottom row is even more packed because this month I'm working on writing. I'll keep you posted on that. I have no idea what the future holds on that front, what publishing might or might not look like, but I feel a deep sense of calling around it, and it's related to some of what we've talked about if you're around for that Lenten series, From Ashes to Beauty. So just wanted to let you know that's what's going on there, and very possibly more to come. But I thought I would reflect for a couple of moments, since this is 4th of July weekend, on a very important word for our nation, for our world, as well as our lives, and that's freedom. And the kind of freedom that we really want and what we're called to. In the Civil War era, when Lincoln was running for president, one of the observations he made was that Americans tended to have different definitions for the same word. He was thinking particularly about freedom or liberty. And he said the North believed that they were champions of that because they wanted there not to be slavery. But the South felt like they were being tyrannized by the North, and the South, of course, this would be the whites in the South, defined liberty for them, freedom for them, as the freedom to be able to continue the institution of slavery. So he said it's the same word, real different definitions. And I want to talk about that in our day, the notion of freedom. Most often, when we think about freedom, particularly in the West, particularly in America, we think about freedom from. I want to be free from restraints. I want to be free from anybody who's trying to tell me what it is that I can or cannot do. If you have been damaged by legalistic forms of religion, that might be a great source of freedom to think, freedom to dance, drink, swear, do whatever I want to do. And we chafe against the absence of this freedom because we were made in God's image to have our own little kingdoms. And if anybody else tries to run our kingdoms, then that rubs us the wrong way. Sometimes at night, I will tell Nancy, I command you to turn off the light. She'll leave it on all night just because she wants to be free. Nobody wants to have their freedom invaded. James K. Smith has written a book called On the Road with St. Augustine. And he has a paragraph about this. This notion of freedom, freedom from, is the only freedom we know now. Freedom as self-determination. The freedom to decide what is my own good is enshrined in Justice Anthony Kennedy's majority opinion in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, of the mystery of human life. In other words, Smith writes, freedom means hands off. I got this. I know what I want. I'll know I'm free when I get to decide what's good for me, when every choice is a blank check of opportunity and possibility. Freedom, by this definition, is freedom from any kind of constraint, any kind of authority. But there is a problem. I am not God. I am a creature. I am an embodied creature. I am a creature who has desires. I am a creature who is molded around habits. And so eventually, I'm the kind of person who can become enslaved by the very desires that I think that I'm choosing. Augustine talked about what he called the chain of slavery, that part of our difficulty is we have distorted wills. All of us go after the wrong things. And the consequence of distorted will is passion, emotion unchecked. And then passion, when it is served, leads to habit. And habit, when it is no longer met with resistance, leads to necessity. And necessity, when there is no power against it, leads to slavery, leads to bondage. And that is where we find ourselves. And so in addiction, we see this in particularly poignant ways. Somebody, when they're younger, might say, I was told you cannot drink, but now I have freedom, now I can drink. And then they begin to drink. And then eventually it becomes true again, you cannot drink. Only now the problem is not an external constraint. Now it's not an external barrier, now it's an internal barrier. And we've talked, if you've been around for some of these videos before, about an early experience in the founding of what would become Alcoholics Anonymous. A young man who was so in bondage to alcohol, he went to spend a year with Carl Jung in Switzerland so that he could be analyzed and healed. And he was. And he left Jung, but before he got on the boat to go back to the States, he found himself drunk again. And he went back to Jung and told him what had happened and said, "Can you help me?" And Jung said, "No." And he said, "I felt the gates of hell clang shut." And he asked Jung, "Is there no hope for someone like me?" And Jung said, "One. I have known some people who have had a religious experience, a kind of spiritual awakening by which they are given the power. And that came, and it comes to people still, so that it becomes possible once again to say, you can not drink. No longer as a statement of external restraint or coercion, but now as a statement of internal power. It is now possible. Salvation is possible for me. I can have power. See, freedom is not just freedom from a constraint. Freedom is also freedom for, the freedom to be able to. One of my favorite books is written by an author named Norman Maclean, and it's called A River Runs Through It. Maclean was quite a remarkable guy. He was the son of a Protestant minister father, and he went off to University of Chicago, and he taught English literature for decades. And his wife, who he loved dearly, passed away, and he found himself morose, bitter, volatile, drunk. And his children suggested to him that he write the stories that he used to tell them at bedtime. And so he did, and at 70, he published his first book, and it was called A River Runs Through It. And he writes about how in our family growing up, there was no line between religion and fly fishing. He knew that the disciples were fishermen and believed that James and John, the favorites, were fly fishermen. And he said, my father, a Presbyterian minister, was certain about some truths in the universe. He believed that all good things, from trout to eternal salvation, come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. Now, this is something that is often misunderstood. We often think of grace as nothing other than the legal forgiveness of sins that comes to us apart from any effort. But actually, all good things come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. And so we become disciples. We enter into disciplines. And being a disciple, entering into disciplines, is always, always, always about freedom. A fly fisherman is someone who is able to cast a fly at just the right time, into just the right place, in just the right way. And that freedom has been acquired by discipline. Grace comes through art, and art does not come easy. A pianist practices for years and years and years, is a disciple of a master, so that they will have the freedom to play the right note at the right time, at the right speed, with the right feeling, in the right way. And that's freedom. That's the freedom for which we were made. That's why Paul said these amazing words, that it is for freedom that you have been set free. This is in Galatians chapter 5. But then in verse 13, he says, but do not use your freedom as an occasion to indulge the flesh. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. But the ultimate road that leads you to is bondage. You can't not, whatever that ultimate addiction, desire, habit becomes. Don't use that freedom as an occasion to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. Now, to serve, or to be a slave, is an expression Paul often would use, seems to us like the opposite of freedom. Paul, what are you smoking? But it is actually a life in the service of the good, in the service of love, that leads to the only freedom that is worth having, which is the freedom to live the right kind of life and to become the right kind of person. So this year, on the 4th of July, celebrate freedom and pursue the freedom that is worth having, that comes by grace, because God created the world as a gift of grace and put a garden in the middle of that world. And in the garden, there flows a river whose streams make glad the city of God, and a river runs through it. All good things come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. Be free. I will talk to you again soon.